Hey, my name is Linus, and you're watching the first installment of my series with game designer commentary for my game Eldritch. In this episode, I'll try to cover the basic principles I've built this game on, and also try to answer the question what prompted me to design and publish the game. So let me first start with kind of the road that led me here, and the game that inspired Eldritch Instinct, but that I also try to be different from. So the first game I've played was Call of Cthulhu, and you could say that it is a traditional role-playing game, or maybe a simulationist role-playing game. And I say that because you kind of create a character, and they have some skills, some attributes. You throw them into a scenario, and the fun is in seeing what happens to them, how they fare, and what kind of problems happen along the way. At some point, I've kind of felt a bit dissatisfied with this style of play because there's always this level of abstraction between a player and the game world or their character. You interact mostly with the mechanics instead of the world directly through conversation and questions. And that means that, for one, players tend to be less creative when describing their characters' actions and reactions. And also, sometimes good ideas are being shot down because, after all, you're supposed to roll if your character is trying to do something. And also, if there's no mechanic for a thing, then it's in the common domain and every character can do it. So if you introduce a whole bunch of skills or abilities, then this restricts your problem-solving efforts as a player to the skills you have invested in. Yeah, so that led me to looking for other games, and the next game I've played quite a lot is Cthulhu Dark. This is not a traditional role-playing game, but a story game. Just by default, your characters don't fail when they attempt to do something like to research. It's only if a player, that includes the game master, thinks it would be interesting if the player failed, then they roll a failure die against the player. And Cthulhu Dark is also a great and groundbreaking game, and I recommend everyone to check out the rules. The problem with Cthulhu Dark for me is that it gives players quite a lot of agency or authority on what happens in the session. If they don't want to get hurt, like for example, they can usually just re-roll more or less as often as they'd like until they kind of gain too many insight points. Now, there are some limits, but they are quite loose. And sometimes, as a player, you don't really want to have this kind of authority, and rather would like that things happen to you or to your character instead of you controlling the narrative collaboratively with the rest of the group. Also, Cthulhu Dark focuses heavily on so-called purist adventures, which are very close to the power level and the themes of the original Lovecraft stories. But I wanted something with more action and more combat, even including mythos creatures. So I began trying to hack these systems, Call of Cthulhu and Cthulhu Dark, and at some point I discovered the OSR through Naive and OD&D, later Mothership, and this is where I discovered principles such as challenging the players instead of the characters, or as it's kind of phrased in the NSR principles on some website, external interaction. You as a player interact with the game world directly through asking questions and providing descriptions instead of using abstract mechanics. This also meant that characters in my games should be capable investigators. They should be able to sneak, they should be able to fight, to do research, and all of these things. The fun should be in being challenged as a player and making decisions in the game world and seeing how it affects the NPCs and the game world. Then there's a third game, which is worth mentioning. I think we started working on those games roughly at the same time, but I didn't discover it until some years later. And I'm talking about Liminal Horror, which is also based on Cairn. When it came out, I thought to myself whether it was worth pushing on and refining my game, or whether it would be fine to just play Liminal Horror and maybe make some modifications to it, especially once the Roaring Age came out, which is kind of a hack of Liminal Horror to make it fit more to Mythos Investigations. I've played the Bureau and I've read them all, tried a few things, but I think I was able to kind of pinpoint a few differences between what Liminal Horror did and what I wanted to do. And first of all, which is pretty obvious, I think, is that Liminal Horror focuses on liminality and the horror that comes from your characters changing. And you see that in the Fallout tables and with you losing control. While what I want to do with Eldritch Instinct is focus more on the emotional and psychological impact of what's happening to your character and building up stress, sort of like in Mothership or Alien or whatever, up to a breaking point where your characters behave in unexpected ways. I think I would say these are the three games that inspired my own creation, but also that I wanted to kind of avoid and be different from. Also, I think the Liminal Horror adventures and scenarios are great, very well worth checking out. But I think what I'm trying to do is maybe a bit less randomized and instead a bit more direct. It's sort of maybe more like a traditional sandbox scenario instead of the heavily OSR-inspired sandboxes that Liminal Horror does. But yeah, I might be getting ahead of myself here. I should also clarify that the kind of shortcomings that I have listed are just the other side of the coin of what makes these games great. And with Eldritch Instinct, I'm not necessarily trying to do something better than these games, just something different. So these are the first two principles, assumed competence and external interaction. These two serve the third principle, which is immersion. I wanted to remove the layer of abstraction and instead use external interaction to make you as a player more immersed in the game world. And mostly that means throwing out mechanics that you don't need, but at some point we might also have to include new mechanics or leave mechanics in where it fits. For example, tracking ammunition is something that's well suited here, or kind of tracking who's carrying a sort of a source of light. And then the principle of roleplay. Mechanics should create tense and exciting situations both in and out of the game and force players to make tough choices. This one was very much inspired by Cthulhu Dark. I think it's so well designed and it's so effective at creating tension and fear in the players that it almost runs itself. It makes your job as a GM so much easier if you are using this system. And I tried to include mechanics that do a similar thing. And we'll see that, for example, when we're going to talk about the agenda clock, which kind of tries to make players feel this time pressure. Other than that, we should try to fail forward. Players roll saves to avoid complications in risky situations. In contrast, maybe to rolling to see whether a character is able to do something or not. And then there's the principle of neutrality, where you are not really on the player's side or against them necessarily, but you are just a neutral arbiter, and I think this also helps players to immerse themselves in the game world. And lastly, the principle of rulings means that this book isn't a set of hard and fast rules that you have to follow, but it's more like a toolbox that you can pick and choose what you'll need, and you can modify and rearrange things to kind of make this game your own and suit your needs. The subtitle of my game is Cosmic Horror and Pulp Action. First of all, it's cosmic horror instead of like something like liminal horror. It's also pulp action instead of purist Lovecraftian scenarios. And it's also based on principles of the New School Revolution, such as external interaction and challenging the players instead of the characters. Okay, so this was the first episode. This is kind of what you can expect going forward when we'll talk about principles for players, wardens, and then going into character creation and so on. If you have any questions that you want me to answer, drop a comment on YouTube or maybe join the Discord. Links in the description. And again, thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next one.